Hello, everybody. My name is Mandy Sally. I am the Chief Operating Officer at the Woodhull Freedom Foundation, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to our Spokes Hub graduation today. Woodhull is so proud to be a part of the Spokes Hub program. We're so proud to have New Moon Fund as one of our fiscal sponsees and Savannah Sly as one of our board members. I'm really excited to hear from all of our graduates today. I was exceptionally moved by the first Spokes Hub graduation at our Sexual Freedom Summit this past August. So I assure you that we have something really exciting and powerful in store for you today. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all of the graduates for participating in this program. And please stay tuned to Woodhull's communications and our website for information about how you can be a future Spokes Hub graduate or support the program. Thanks again, and I look forward to the program.
Welcome, everyone, to the Spokes Hub spring graduation. That's my baby coughing. He takes the right time. And I'm really excited to hear from everyone today. I think we have 4 speakers. I didn't say this, but I'm the co-coordinator for the program. A little disjointed, a little sleepy, but I'm excited to hear from everyone. And I'm just going to pass it on over to Savannah.
Thanks, Moses. And hello, Moses's baby over there. And hello to you all. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is the second Spokes Hub graduation. Spokes Hub is a virtual peer support program for new advocates who are learning to develop their voice and to speak on complex issues. The past several cohorts have been dedicated to the issue of sex work. And today you're going to be hearing 4 pieces from some graduates from this past session on a variety of topics connected to the issue of sex work. So Spokes Hub is usually a cohort model, but we're going to be moving into an open enrollment program because people have expressed interest and we want to make the program more accessible to everyone who's interested. So stay tuned. At the end of the presentations, we'll talk a little bit more about that. And thank you all for coming.
The first graduate that we're going to hear from is Lauren Levitt. Lauren is a Chancellor's Postdoctoral Fellow in Media and Cultural Studies at the University of California, Riverside, and she is on the advisory board of the Sex Workers Outreach Project, Los Angeles. Lauren is currently working on a book about sex workers' networks of care. And now, without further ado, we will hear from Lauren.
Thank you, Moses. Even though capitalist ways of thinking have permeated many aspects of life, capitalism is never monolithic. Even from within capitalist spaces like the workplace, new relationships based on reciprocity rather than competition can emerge. A world where wealth is shared more equally is not just a utopian fantasy. Non-capitalist economic cultures are not only possible, but they already exist. Marginalized people regularly engage in alternative economic practices as a survival strategy. For instance, sex workers at places like massage parlors, dungeons, and strip clubs form rich support networks to share knowledge, resources, and care. These caring and sharing practices are an example of mutual aid. Sex workers also create queer forms of family with each other, and these relationships directly respond to the precarity and stigma of sex work. On a rainy day in March 2017, I went to visit Sabrina in the house she shared with several other women in a trendy neighborhood in a large city in the Western United States. Sabrina had moved there several years prior to pursue a career in acting and writing, and she worked as a server at a high-end restaurant downtown. Sabrina grew up in the South, but she moved to a large city in the northeastern United States to attend a prestigious acting conservatory after college. In 2013, she was working there as an actor and a bartender. Sabrina was a month from being evicted from her apartment for renovations in a gentrifying neighborhood, and she had just been cast in a play that was rehearsing at night. Sabrina needed money to move, and since she couldn't continue bartending while the play was in rehearsals, she needed to find a day job, She had just dated a guy whose ex-girlfriend had been a dominatrix. So when she saw a classified ad on Craigslist for dom work, she decided to apply. Shortly thereafter, Sabrina started working at a large and well-known dungeon, a sex work establishment providing clients BDSM services for a steep fee. While commercial BDSM occupies a legal gray area, some BDSM services are unambiguously criminalized. All the employees at the dungeon were assigned female at birth by management policy, although not necessarily cis women. And the vast majority of the clients were men. Sabrina thought that working at the dungeon would be a way to explore her power and sexuality, but she didn't know much about the job when she started. I really wasn't experienced with the world of BDSM, and so going into it, I was expecting to learn a lot about it through doing it, through the experience. So it was pretty shocking and exciting every day because I didn't know what to expect, she said. Sabrina was surprised that most of the time the women at the dungeon sat around waiting for clients to arrive. The world of women sitting in these dark rooms for 8 hours a day sometimes was not something I expected, she said. We had a lot of downtime. We'd see clients every once in a while. Maybe you'd have 1 or 2 a day. Maybe you'd have none. The rest of the time is just spent in these little close quarters with like 10 other women. Although the women were competing for clients and it could get catty, Sabrina stressed that since they were constantly putting themselves in vulnerable positions, both emotionally and physically, the women provided one another with intense support. Sabrina described herself as a shy and introverted person, which she attributed to being bullied as a child. So at first, she was hesitant to make friends with other women at the dungeon. It was a really difficult thing for me to be around so many people at once. I guess overall, I was pretty uncomfortable around everyone for the most part. I tried to kind of stick to myself, she said. My strategy was to stay as invisible as possible. I wasn't trying to get into any kind of drama with anyone, but at the same time, I didn't want to be the one that wasn't liked. I didn't want to be singled out. However, in time, Sabrina made friends with a few women at the dungeon around whom she could be herself. I felt like the environment was sort of superficial, and we were playing these characters. There were only a few people who I felt like I could be more of who I really am around, and not the person that I had to be because of where I was, she said. She described these relationships as really supporting and really nurturing to me because they made me feel like I was not alone. Sabrina was never on bad terms with anyone at the dungeon, but she tried to keep her distance from the women with whom she wasn't close friends. I just felt that the environment was so volatile that anytime anything could happen and the scales could tip. So it was important to me to keep things really even. And in doing so, I kept a distance because I felt like that was the safest place to be in order for things not to shift, she said. Sabrina admitted, however, that she may have missed out on the opportunity to have an even wider support group because of this. When asked about a time that she received support from a coworker, Sabrina said, "I feel like I receive support on a constant basis. I feel like any time I went into a room to see a client and came out of it, I was supported, as long as there were people there who were my friends." When prompted to give an example of a time that a coworker gave her emotional support, Sabrina told a story about a time she received emotional care from a friend after a particularly difficult session. "I had a client and I went further than I wanted to go with this person. And I knew going into the room that he was a red flag person. It was like, watch out for this person and all of this. So coming out of it, I remember feeling pretty raw about it or vulnerable about it because I told myself it wasn't going to happen, and then it did." Since this incident occurred after Sabrina had already been working at the dungeon for a while and felt much closer to people there, she was able to talk about her experience with someone who would understand and not judge her. "I don't remember who it was, But I do remember coming out of that and being grateful that there was someone I could talk to about it. And I didn't feel ashamed to talk about it, Sabrina said. Sabrina also frequently reciprocated emotional support for other women at the dungeon, although she could not come up with a specific example. I just feel like everything was emotional. I feel like I probably gave emotional support every single day at some level, she said. According to Sabrina, material support was also abundant at the dungeon. Every time anyone really needed something, there was always someone there to offer it. We had lockers, and the lockers were full of whatever you could want. Water, alcohol, Band-Aids, she said. Specifically, Sabrina remembered another dom giving her a pair of pants. I don't know that I needed pants in that moment, but she gave them to me. She was always giving out gifts, things that she found, things that she had, and there were times when I would need something specific to see a client, and I might not have it, and so she would have it, or somebody else would have something, and we were always supporting each other in that way. At the dungeon, the women who had been working there longer would sometimes train the newcomers for free, and Sabrina even remembered a time when she took someone new into session to train her and gave her part of her own tip. Although she made nothing of it, this would have been an extremely generous gesture on Sabrina's part. Sabrina did not remember being physically cared for at the dungeon, but she remembered other people taking care of each other when they were sick. She did, however, remember providing others with physical care. When I started working at the dungeon, I was also training in Reiki, which I was really excited to utilize both at the same time. And so there were times when I would do Reiki or massage on some of the women who I worked with, she said. However, by far the most common type of support women offered each other at the dungeon, according to Sabrina, was information sharing. This was because they spent so much time sitting around and talking to each other. She said, I feel like we were constantly sharing information about our lives. That's one thing. But also, even more, we would talk about certain things that had to do with the work itself, sharing information about how to be safe, or how to do things in this way or that way, in ways that bettered each other in terms of our work that we were doing, and specific clients, and how to keep each other safe. We did, I think, especially share information about that. In this type of information sharing too, the women were looking out for one another, caring for one another. Sabrina engaged extensively in information sharing, particularly about what to expect from clients. I think that was very valuable to new people who would come into the group who didn't know. And I think it's something that really I benefited from initially, she said. Stressing the significance of this type of information sharing, Sabrina said, I think generally sharing information in that environment was the most important because there's a lot of variables. And for new people not knowing how to navigate that world, I think that was the most valuable thing that could be offered to them. However, women at the dungeon could also be mean to each other and talk about coworkers behind their backs. It reminded me of high school, the lockers and the pettiness and the volatility and these cliques that would happen, Sabrina said. There were people that were part of certain groups, and people were excluded. Sabrina herself did not want to be part of any group, but she also didn't want to be excluded. In the beginning, Sabrina found the dynamic at the dungeon strange. However, eventually she realized that even these mean girls were helping in their own way by teaching her a valuable lesson about working at the dungeon. It was just so scary. I was scared all of the time. And then as time went on, I realized what a resource it was, what an opportunity it was to have this. And I understood that you had to be strong to get through it. And I felt like on some level, some of the women who've been there the longest, who were part of these cliques, were testing everyone or assisting in this weird way that only they knew how, which was to make you stronger so that you could deal with everything, because you had to be strong to deal with it. And if you couldn't, then you should just leave, which a lot of people did. In other words, these senior workers were not only gatekeepers, they were helping junior workers develop the thick skin they would need to handle the intense emotional demands of the job. Sabrina, who's also a writer, found the dynamic of women at the dungeon so interesting that she would like to write a television show about it. The show would be a dark comedy, she said. It would definitely be funny, because the stuff that we did was so ridiculous. Some of it was so silly, like spanking these old men. And I feel like comedy and laughter gets you through the darker moments in life. And I think there's a lot of darkness within that world, people dealing with their trauma. Specifically, many of the clients were dealing with past traumas. And Sabrina, like many who worked at the dungeon, saw herself as a kind of therapist for these men. You know, some of the stuff that comes up is really sad from people's childhoods and abuse. But I think we get through those moments by releasing the sadness or releasing the darkness and letting some of the life and laughter in, she said. Thus, women at the dungeon saw themselves as caring not only for each other, but also for their clients by helping them heal from psychic trauma.
That was great. Thank you so much, Lauren. I hope that everybody enjoyed that piece. I know that I did when I first read it. It's really important to be investigating how sex workers take care of themselves and each other through these important networks. And appropriately, Lauren's piece was entitled Sex Workers Support Networks. This next speaker is Liz Elytra, and Liz Elytra is a current disabled sex worker of 10 years and a student of gender, sexuality, and disability studies. She is working on a counseling degree that will help her better serve marginalized sex workers and those in the sex work community. In her downtime, she creates art that showcases sex workers, nudity, and body positivity by displaying a range of gender and body expressions. So next up, we have Liz Elytra, and this piece is entitled Sex Trade, Security, and Adversity.
I started working in the sex trade in the summer of 2012, about 2 years after my official diagnosis. In my time as a sex worker, I have read countless narratives from other disabled sex workers that tell a story not unlike my own. That sex work in all of its forms gives disabled folks financial security, control over our unique bodily needs, and even important visual representation in the case of visibly disabled porn performers. For me, a 40-hour work week was not the kind of schedule that my body can handle, but is the type of pay I need to survive. I've not seen it talked about often, but disabled folks often have a higher cost of living due to daily medications, treatments, devices, frequent emergency hospital trips. The things that are not always covered by insurance, but can become an ongoing list of out-of-pocket expenses. As a disabled person, working in the sex trade has been the best decision for me. A strong sense of community, options to work from home, which has kept me particularly safe, both financially and physically during the COVID pandemic, and the ability to schedule around my bad health days has allowed me to thrive. At conventional jobs, I've had to be concerned about using up sick days and had to weigh the severity of my flare-ups in order to ration my allotted time off. Over these last 10 years of performing sex work, my fans and clients have shown up to support me by returning to my services and my company, even when my disability has kept me away for weeks or even months. I have often joked that inconsistency is my niche. However, disabilities can compound some of the challenges of working in the sex trade. Online policy changes, like those that arise because of SESTA and FOSTA, for example, can leave disabled folks more vulnerable than their able-bodied counterparts. When SESTA, the Stop Enabling Sex Traffickers Act, and FOSTA, Fight Online Sex Trafficking Act, went into effect, internet platforms became responsible for the media the users posted, which has resulted in ever-increasing censorship of sex workers. This online censorship has deprived sex workers of the means of screening clientele for safety purposes, creating situations where sex workers become more likely to be exposed to violence. Without these safety measures in place, disabled folks in the sex trade are left without access to work and without the ability to assimilate into conventional forms of employment, are thrust back into poverty. This is just one of the examples of the ways disabilities can compound the challenges of the sex trade. While sex work has been extremely empowering for me, it is not empowering for all who engage in it. It is just work. And those of us in the sex trade struggle to access similar rights and protections long standardized in other industries. I'm going to end on this thought. The social model of disability delineates physical or mental limitations called impairments as distinct from disability, which is caused by social exclusion. Or said in another way, people with impairments are disabled by society's barriers. When it comes to disability rights and sex worker rights, the two go hand in hand. Services or organizations run by disabled folks in the sex trade are going to have the most appropriate solutions for that group. I think this sentiment is best highlighted by a phrase that has been circulating within advocacy for a few decades, and that is, nothing about us without us. Thank you.
The next speaker is Mo. I'm going to read the bio. It says, I started my sex work advocacy journey in 2019 and quickly found a passion for it. I've decided to share what I have learned in sex work, and in my own mental health journey, I have facilitated peer support groups and given presentations on mental health. I'm also the co-founder of Sex Workers Against Tyranny, a group of sex workers and allies who work together to provide mutual aid, mental health support, and general community. So, our next speaker, let's welcome Mo.
Thank you, Moses. I appreciate the intro. I just wanted to share some of the things that I have learned in my journey. So I have created the Sex Worker Mental Health Toolbox. And just a little bit about me, my mental health has always been a very big part of my life. It's something that I struggled with. I've made quite a few mistakes along the way, but I've also picked up some really great skills that I would love to share with you guys. So why should you take care of your mental health? It gives you more energy and you can focus on your work better. It gives you decreased depression, increased self-esteem. There's awareness of your boundaries in your life and work that you can gain by taking care of your mental health and making sure that those things are in order. And you often have a more positive outlook and less burnout. How do you know that you need help? So some signs of crisis are suicidal ideations, self-harm, making reckless decisions, lack of boundaries, difficulty with self-care, and sudden mood swings. Typically, when you see these things, you either need to reach out to your supports. If you're having suicidal ideations, you should reach out to a hotline and see if you can get support or go to an ER. So one of the things that I wanted to go over is caregiver burnout versus compassion fatigue. And some of you might question how this relates to sex work, but oftentimes as sex workers, we take on a lot of our clients' emotions. Sometimes we end up taking care of them in certain relationships that we may have with them. And when you experience caregiver burnout, it's when you're taking care of someone and you reach a state of complete exhaustion. You often have too much work or too many expectations. For an example, you can experience burnout due to caring for emotional, physical, or sexual needs of others. Now, compassion fatigue is a little bit different. Compassion fatigue is when you become exhausted from carrying the emotional burden of others. You have no more empathy left to give, and you often want to keep doing your work, but are exhausted from what you're being exposed to. I find that in my sex work journey, I have experienced both of these, and that many other sex workers have as well. So I want to talk about the effect that sex work can have on your mental health. There are positives and negatives in any job there would be. And just because you have negative experiences, it doesn't mean you deserve to be criminalized, as often as that happens. And even though sex work is not recognized as a real job, we deserve respect that everyone in any profession should. Don't let anyone tell you differently, because it is a real job. As for the positives, it gives you a freedom to set your own schedule. It gives you a better understanding of boundaries. It can give you a sense of community, and you can build relationships. I cannot tell you how many countless friendships I have formed from doing sex work, meeting people along the way and sharing my journey and them sharing theirs with me. You can help others. It teaches consent. Before I found sex work, my thoughts on consent were wrong. I didn't understand that I had the power to give and take away that consent. And sex work really taught me those healthy boundaries there. It also can teach you marketing skills. As for the negatives, unfortunately, you can be exposed to some traumatic situations. Sometimes sex work can be risky. You can also take on too much. Some sex work can be dangerous than others. You can become overwhelmed or experience burnout. And then sometimes there are unstable financial situations when you have clients that are really good one week and not the greatest the next week. Mental health benefits of decriminalizing sex work. It gives us recognition of the work we do, leading to respect in our workplace. We're able to work with local authorities to report offenders, able to report financials, leading to better access to housing and medical care. There's no stress about possible arrest or incarceration. There's no fear of being outed, and there's no fear of losing custody of our children, being fired from our other jobs, or loss of housing due to the work that we do. So I did want to go ahead and share some of the mental health skills that I have learned along the way. There are a lot on this slide, so I'm not going to go over every individual one. I'm just going to share a couple of my favorites with you. The first thing that I have listed on there is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What you do is you look around for 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. Another one that I use frequently is a frozen washcloth. Basically, all I do is get it wet, roll it up, put it in the freezer, and let it freeze. And anytime I have a panic attack, I can take it out and let it melt in my hands and play with it and pull it apart. And it is just a way to calm the anxiety and get your mind off of something else that you're doing. Just some other things you could do. You could take a walk, stretches, hold on ice, take a shower, listen to music, or look at photos. One of the things that I really enjoy creating is grounding kits. This particular grounding kit that I created in the photo is actually one that I made for my daughter. She uses it regularly to calm down. But I have one of my own, and I've also helped other adults and other sex workers make theirs. Grounding kits can be a bag, it can be a box, whatever you want it to be. And inside is something that appeals to each of the 5 senses, going back to that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 we just talked about. And it can be used during high periods of anxiety to help you calm. Some ideas for your kit could be for sight. You could do photos, cards with skills written on them. For hearing, you could do a bell, maraca. We did poppets for hers. For touch, fidgets, even just playing with some of those things that just mess around with your hand are really helpful just to get your mind off of things. Smell, I most commonly do essential oils. Just rub it on your wrists and kind of just smell it. And then taste, you could do gum, candy, just something. I personally put Warheads in mine because the strong sour just kind of like really takes your mind off of stuff. And then, could therapy work for you? Many therapists offer private pay and sliding scale fees. There are sex worker allied therapists, and it gives a neutral and private party to speak to. There are options for online and texting as well as in person. I wanted to list a couple places that you could find therapists. The first one is Psychology Today. On their website, there is an option for sex work allied therapists. There are also options for kink allied therapists, LGBTQ. You can basically just pick every box that you want in a therapist, and you'll be able to find someone in your area. Another option is Pineapple Support. This is only for online performers, but it is still a really great option. It provides 24/7 support online, and they offer professional therapy as well. So I wanted to list a couple of the other options that there are. There are hotlines available. Just a disclaimer, if you're in active danger, most hotlines are obligated to ensure your safety. This can include calling a welfare check from local authorities. But they are really great options if you need someone to talk to. I personally have called a few of them, and I can tell you that the 988, that text, has definitely been a huge support of mine. So there's a whole bunch listed. And then if you guys have any questions or anything else, feel free to reach out, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Mo, for sharing that important information. Next up, we have one more speaker. We have Mila coming to us to speak about sex work in socialist space. Mila is a political activist, writer, and practicing prole. She received her BA in Gender and Labor Studies from SUNY Empire State College as a continuing ed student debtor and believes education should be accessible, non-elitist, and free. Through the lens of class consciousness, her area of focus explores sex work and other informal economies in socialist contexts. She has organized on behalf of sex workers, poor people, and others exploited by capitalism from the northeastern US to Atlanta to Cuba. Her creative writing has been published in St. James Infirmary and Red Umbrella Ride's Sex Worker Safety Zine. Introducing Mila.
Thank you so much, Savannah. Before I get into this, I just want to note that I'm not going to be reading some of the footnotes that I included in this piece, just because it's sort of distracting to jump around. But yeah, I encourage y'all to read them if you have access to it, because I think they discuss some of the more real life examples of some of the things I'm going to be talking about. Okay. As wealth inequality grows, cost of living continues to rise and force people into mobility, and bodily autonomy is increasingly infringed upon, the struggle towards an equitable, livable future begs for urgency. Socialists' call for a worker-led movement, however, habitually excludes sex worker involvement or support, and a unified party position has yet to be reached. Where is sex work's place in Marxist theory and socialist praxis? How have those who trade sex been left out of leftist discourse? Why are they so important to a liberatory struggle? I seek to start a conversation around these questions by introducing discussions of sex work in Marxist theory, their categorization as part of the lumpen proletariat or underclass, and how their presence in leftist movements has the potential to change colonial and heteronormative thought. I've seen sex workers in leftist spaces be at best tokenized and at worst called gender traders and labor deserters. I've watched as sex work issues have been disappeared from organizing campaigns so as not to alienate potential member requisitions. Time and time again, those who trade or sell sex have been barred from engaging in conversations pertaining to their political self-actualization. This conservative morality exhibited by leftists and socialists who claim to value materialism above all else exposes enduring colonial capitalist ideologies within their movements. At its origins in Marx's writing, and later in the writings of communist feminist Alexandra Kollontai, the denigration of the prostitute in class-conscious theory acts as both a metaphor and martyr to the exploitation of marriage and labor. From Marx's Private Property and Communism, quote, "Prostitution is only a particular expression of the universal prostitution of the worker." I take issue with such analogous objectification of sex workers' lived experience, which does little to hide Marx and Kollontais' moral disdain. Prostitution could only be understood as a symbol of former worker oppression insofar as it serves a sensational and moral analogy to exploitation. This attitude is routinely reflected by often white socialists who use selective interpretations of sex work's mechanization under capitalism to support their objection to sex work advocacy. Under capitalism, sex work represents, quote, the most abstract form of crisis as the metamorphosis of the commodity itself, end quote. Another challenge to classical Marxist beliefs that the commodity is without voice and therefore incapable of resistance. Again, I protest. Sex workers inhabit a space of prolific resistance. Without arguing that engaging in sex work is empowering or denying power hierarchies that may be at play, we can acknowledge the agency exercised by those who demand inclusion in an economy that they have been pushed out of. Sex work defies capitalist subordination by working outside its boundaries of productive, reproductive, and paid, unpaid labor. Erotic commodification monetizes emotional and sexual aspects of reproduction, but does not replace its unpaid existence. Sex workers are cleaning their houses, clothing their babies, cooking for their neighbors, and engaging their communities. Should they not also be afforded the opportunity to participate politically in conversations surrounding their exploitation? A further categorization of sex workers by Marx as part of the lumpenproletariat, a criminal, unproductive underclass, provides more fodder for dogmatists to cast them aside as counter-revolutionary. To this point, I argue in complete contradiction and turn to Fanon and believing that such an underclass, while not innately political, is a crucial part of the revolution as they are the group most intimately familiar with the consequences of capitalism and stand the most to gain from the elimination of the source of their exploitation. It is materially inaccurate to reject sex workers on the basis of their inclusion in this class. Some of the most effective leftist political and mutual aid organizing in the US has been done by groups who seek to mobilize the underclass as a vanguard, such as the Black Panther Party and the Young Lords. These groups operated in resistance to colonial racism that lingers in leftist thought, and that is the backbone of capitalism, by, quote, embodying non-heteronormativity, because racialized bodies, just by virtue of being considered different, already embody non-heteronormativity, end quote. The race and class contexts of sex work overlap the same systems of challenging colonial thought. In such a way, challenging the heteronormativity of race, class, and gender together is the only avenue towards a comprehensive collective liberation. The conflated oppression of racialized, classed, and gendered groups has fed into, if not created, the stigmatization of sex. This has been used for centuries as a weapon against class solidarity and in order to regulate heteronormative family structures that allow for unpaid reproductive labor and care work. Anthropologist Florence Babb suggests a queering of research surrounding gender, labor, and family systems, which I believe, when applied to leftist discourse, would allow for a re-examination of assumptions about heteronormative primacy, its colonial roots, and its entanglement with race and class. Questioning these assumptions in a politically driven, class-based analysis has the potential to aid in liberation from patriarchy and normativity. Challenges to heteronormativity through fields of study like traditional feminism and queer theory isolate sex and gender from class struggle. This is why class struggle is so important. It calls for liberation through working class and underclass vindication. I've been more politically inspired in rooms full of sex workers than in any organizing space I have ever been in, discussed more actionable strategies, heard from more powerful and intelligent speakers, developed more driven and resourced plans. The exclusion of sex workers from formal socialist and other leftist arenas has deprived some of capitalism's most marginalized from opportunities for the autonomous improvement of their material realities and deprived the leftist movement of some of the most knowledgeable, innovative resistors. Thank you, guys.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you for all of the presenters reading your pieces. Listening to them was really great. I was really excited to hear, and a lot of everything that I heard was really interesting. I'm hoping to revisit them on the Woodhull website for Spokes Hub in the future. And now Savannah is going to describe the awards pool.
Right. Thanks, Moses. So congratulations to all the graduates. The point of this program is to support advocates who want to practice developing their voice and learning how to dive deeper on specific topics related to the issue of the sex trade. All of these graduates have done a phenomenal job today, and we're so proud of them. And now they all have access to a financial awards pool. And what this means is when these graduates go out and they do public education work that is otherwise unpaid, so speaking to classrooms or allies or giving workshops, so much public education is unpaid, and we want to change that by offering these advocates access to the financial awards pool. That's part of what Spokes Hub offers. If anybody's interested in Spokes Hub, if they are currently or formerly involved in the sex trade as a sex worker or a survivor, and they would like to advocate, we invite you to join this program. As I said at the top of the program, we've tried a cohort model for 2 sessions now, but we're going to be opening it up to an open enrollment where there will be live classes with discussions that people are welcome to join. And then hopefully there'll also be some online modules so that people can learn at their own pace. So visit the Woodhull website and the Spokes Hub page in particular, and you can learn more about that. So thank you all so much for joining us, and congratulations to everybody.